If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment for more videos like this. Serious, graveyard shift workers, what is the weirdest or creepiest thing you experienced while on the job? I'm the overnight desk at a small hotel, and I've been doing it nearly 6 years. If I were a sim, this is level 2 of the slacker track. Mostly a very, very boring job. But once in a while. So my hotel is on the waterfront, and the dumpster is on the far end of the building, near a crabbing wharf. I'm going out there one night to take out the lobby trash. It's dark as a bowel and I do things out there mostly by touch. So I go to lift the dumpster lid and a dinosaur screams in my face. Great blue herons are terrifying birds in the dark, when they're standing above you flapping their wings because you just upended the surface they're standing on and snapping their knife face at you while making deep screaming noises. This heron and I had other encounters. Once, he was inside the recycling dumpster when I opened it. Frequently, he dropped rotting fish, large fish, off the roof to explode all over our front patio. Once it was a good-sized salmon. Once he even got into an empty guest room during a storm, and I had to herd him out. Or he'd just stand outside and make horrible dinosaur noises. But he finally vanished last winter and I thought I had outlasted him. Maybe I did. But I have a new one now, and he introduced himself by standing right outside my patio door, stretching his neck to be at eye level with me, and shrieking, holding my gaze. Fuck you, birds. Herons aren't even supposed to be nocturnal. Aside from demon birds staying up all night just to screw with me, my hotel has a few ghost things and I have had regular problems with sleepwalkers. I used to work third shift at a factory. The place was non-smoking, but me and the other supervisors let folks smoke on the loading dock on third shift as long as they picked up after themselves. Had some unexpected downtime, so everyone headed out to the dock. Talking, laughing, waiting. All of a sudden this dude appears from the darkness wearing a full fucking suit. Now, to put this into perspective, there isn't anything around us. It's an industrial park. And there are only a few places that even have a third shift nearby. And none of them are adjacent to our facility. And he didn't approach from the direction of the parking lot. It was like he came out of the woodsy patch that separated us from the electronics factory. He says, "Excuse me, I just want to know if you guys are hiring." Yeah, what kind of job are you looking for? He just shrugs. Doesn't matter. I tell him to contact HR. Phone number is on the front sign. He thanks me and then walks back into the darkness, and we can hear him as he's crunching through dried leaves as he disappears into the patch of woods. It was 3 a.m. One of my duties at the mortuary I work for was nighttime body removals. One night, my partner and I showed up around 2 a.m. to grab the paperwork for our removal. When we got inside, we both got the feeling like there was someone there, so we walked through the building, checking to make sure everything was secure, and closing all of the doors. This included the casket room. Everyone hated the casket room. It was freezing cold year-round, the lights were always uncomfortably dim no matter what maintenance did to try to fix them, and there was this mannequin in the corner in full military dress that just felt wrong. The only people who weren't bothered by the room was the cemetery sales staff, and that's only because they had no souls. So my partner and I don't find anyone, so we lock everything up and head out. We get back an hour later, get our new guest logged in, and decide to get a cup of coffee before leaving. He and I walk toward the kitchen, only to find the casket room door open about 3 feet. It's almost pitch black in there, and I can barely make out the red in the mannequin's uniform. It shouldn't be that close to the door. My partner and I froze for a second, then I grabbed his wrist and we backed up into the kitchen and straight out the back door. It honestly felt like if we had gotten too close to the casket room door something bad would have happened. Neither of us would ever go near that room again, even during the day. I could spend time alone in the prep room or crematory no problem, so I'm not easily spooked, but there was something wrong with that room. I was working a security shift at a warehouse out in the middle of nowhere that didn't have any product in it, nor was it up and running. We were put there because the doors wouldn't lock and they had the server room up and running. There was no furniture and no place to sit, and there were no lights installed. So, I'm sitting against a wall near the server room, in the dark, playing Final Fantasy Tactics on my Game Boy. A loud bang comes from the warehouse, so I run out there. Another from the end of the place, it's a door opening and slamming shut. Now, warehouse doors are heavy metal doors that shouldn't just be opening in a breeze. I get to that door and another bang from the side of the warehouse. I figure it was some bored douche running around the warehouse house being annoying. So I ended up just staying outside by the door waiting for them to round the corner. I could hear the doors opening and closing from around the warehouse and could anticipate it. There was a door at the opposite end of the wall I was watching, That door flies open and closes, but nobody came around the corner, so I flung the door open expecting them to be inside running towards this door. Nope. Nothing. So I looked outside again and nobody there either. The door that would be next in line open and closed. I called the cops and my supervisor and they found footprints in the warehouse from the dirt outside. But there weren't any cars in the parking lot and this place was seriously in the cornfields at least 4 miles away from any other buildings. Worked at a bulk item store overnight, in the cafe. I was prepping food for an early morning pickup, and went to my car on my lunch break. Walked out to find a gaze of raccoons surrounding my car completely. I shined my phone light at them in hopes they would disperse, but all eyes went on me immediately, and then started after me as I was fumbling to hold on to the sandwich I had just made. I pounded on the entrance door. The door monitor had walked away to get a soda, and her inevitable waddle back over would have taken too long. I sacrificed my sandwich that night for my freedom. I worked a graveyard shift at a Chevron when I was taking a year off of college. It was around the time the first season of Orange is the New Black came out because I remember I was watching it to get through the night and one guy came in and said it's a show for girls and he doesn't get why a guy would watch it. That's not what I'm here to say though. During that night, maybe 4 a.m., I hear that someone just walked through the door. Expecting a trucker or a teenager here for energy drinks, I look towards the door and there is an old couple lining it to the energy drink section. I wave and wait for them to come to the counter. The woman comes back and asks if I have any Monster coffees in the back. I tell her that we have some in the energy drink section. She says she knows, and right then the husband comes up with all our Monster coffees, every flavor too, and dumps them on the counter. They both crack one open and drink it all without stopping. The woman asks again if we have any more in the back. I go in the back and see we have 3 small pallets of it with 15 to 20 in each one. I go and tell the couple and the old guy says he will come back and help me carry them. So we lug around 50 coffees to the counter and by the time we finish, the woman has finished another. I'm in shook and wondering if I'm hallucinating or this is a prank because I've been working since 11 a.m. because someone called in sick. I then ring up all the coffees and it's like $185 of Monster coffees. The woman says this stuff just goes so fast. We do this every 2 to 3 weeks. So they got all of them paid for and start carrying them to the car. Then they start looking through the store. They both each drink another coffee while searching. I'm standing there watching 2 60-year-olds who aren't extremely fat or skinny, chug these coffees like it was the first liquid they had found in the past month. They finally left and I sat there wondering what I was doing with my life. I laughed to the point I reached tears. Why am I working at a gas station at 22 years old? I should be back in college. Next week I gave my 2 weeks notice and am now back in college. I used to work in a laundromat and it closed at 10 o'clock and every night I go clean it. Well, I have always heard weird shit, baskets rolling around, dryers closing and the occasional voices all off this while I was alone and the place was locked up. The janitorial closet is big and is sort of a small room with stuff in it and a light. One night as I went into the closest to get the mop and bucket, and as I get to the back of the closest the door slammed and locked me in. Now, I'm a big man, but I am not a brave man and if I had not had the keys in my hand ready to unlock that door I would have went through it. Then one night there I had headphones in so I didn't hear anything to spook me. I went through and cleaned out all the washers and dryers and I always leave the do-it open so things dry out and you don't get moldy. As I turn around after cleaning the inside of my last washer I see that all of the dryer and washer doors are open. I totally flipped out and ran to the front door to nope the heel out of there. In my hurry I forgot that the place was locked down. So I'm yanking on the door and realized I hadn't hit the button to open the door. Well, I pressed it and nothing happened. I tried many times and nothing was working. I was locked inside the laundromat with door opening / closing ghosts or something. Hugging the front door I realized what I had to do. I had to go inside that creepy janitorial closet that for some reason had a phone in it, so I could call my boss and have her come and manually unlock the place. The 20 minutes it took her to get there were the most anxiety-inducing moments of my life even though nothing else happened. I was terrified. When my boss arrived, she asked why I was so upset and I told her the events that I had been witness to. She said she understands she has felt with it before and that she thinks it's her husband that committed suicide in the bathroom of the place. That was my last night, I never went back. I swear this is true, just happened a few months ago. I was sitting out in my truck in the parking lot eating lunch around 1 a.m. Out of the corner of my eye I spotted some kind of creature walking along the highway service road alongside our building. Not uncommon to see coyotes, raccoons, cats, or other critters since we were near a big wooded area. But this thing was 2 to 3 feet tall walking upright. Well, not really walking, so much as sort of levitating along slowly. It was pretty dark out, but I could just faintly see this thing making its way on down the road. Really kind of freaking me out because I wasn't quite sure what I was seeing. Fumbled my camera out but couldn't get a good picture of it since my flash was useless. Pulled out my pocket flashlight but still couldn't quite make out WTF it was. Seriously, my heart was racing because I was certain this was a legit cryptozoological encounter. Then I had the bright idea, to turn on my headlights since I was sitting in my truck facing this thing. Lit that bastard up and had a brief moment of confusion followed by relief it wasn't chupacabra followed by laughter. Turns out it was one of these floaty Chuck E. Cheese helium balloons with arms and legs that hovered slightly along the ground. Damn thing had somehow lost its head, but must have gotten loose from some kid at the Chuck E. Cheese about a half mile down the road. I just giggled as I watched it hover on along the way into the darkness of night. Oh, I've got one. When I was 18, I briefly worked nights as a care assistant in a nursing home. The building was a very old ex-convent and was pretty spooky at the best of times. There were 3 floors but I was only ever working on the ground and first floors. One day about 2 weeks and I was sent up to the top floor to get something. It was my first time up there and, for the first time, it occurred to me how odd it was that I'd never worked up there before, or seen any patients who lived up there. So I'm walking along the main corridor, which is pretty narrow and twisty. Being a night shift, we keep the lights on emergency settings, very dim and on motion sensors, so that the residents can sleep. Suddenly, at the other end of the corridor I see this dark shape. It looked like the Grim Reaper, with the dark cowl and long robes, and was even holding what appeared to be some kind of scythe. And it was moving slowly toward me. I knew it wasn't a resident as most of our residents were not ambulatory, and I was pretty sure none of them dressed in dark robes. So I did the logical thing. I turned without even thinking about it and sprinted back down to the first floor where I managed to convey through panicky gestures that there was some kind of terrifying monster on the top floor. After about 5 minutes my coworkers stopped cracking up and explained my mistake to me. You know how I mentioned that the home used to be a convent? Well, apparently part of the deal was that the remaining nuns, who were all pretty old by now, got to continue living on the top floor, without nursing care, and use the facilities of the home, like cooked meals. And not a single person had thought to mention this to me. If I'd worked days, I would have seen them up and about, but the 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. night shift at a nursing home is pretty quiet. The shape I had seen was actually an elderly nun, in robes and a head covering, wimple, with a crutch, not a scythe, heading down the corridor to their little chapel as she couldn't sleep. And not, as I had for some reason assumed, the Grim Reaper here to collect one of our residents. I switched off night shift soon after that. Working in a hospital, quite a few weird things happen. Just 2 examples. 1. We had a patient on the ward which was in the dying process. She used the emergency bell, not sure what the correct English term is, but that thing patients use when they need something. So I go to her room and the patient asks me why is that dark guy standing over there? But there was no one to be seen. So I tried to tell her and she was okay with it. An hour later she rang again. I'm going to her room and she again asks why is that guy standing over there, pointing into the nothingness. That happened a few times but there never was anyone and no one could have entered the ward without me knowing, nor any other patient going to the room without noticing. At the end of the night I found her dead. She was allowed to die and everyone knew it was going to happen. 2. Had a patient in a room with 4 guys, he was pretty normal, nothing out of the ordinary. One night one of the other patients of that room walked up to me and told me that one of the guys in the room has been in the bathroom for about 15 minutes, locked himself in there and there weren't any noises coming out anymore. So I get up and was about to check on him. We can unlock all doors from the outside. But as soon as I enter the room, the guy comes out of the bathroom, walks to his bed across the window and sits down. I walk up to him and ask him if everything is okay but he just replies with they're killing all the people. So I ask him who's killing someone and he replies with those guys out there and points outside the window. Then I ask him if he can tell me what year it is and he replies with 1438 and keeps saying they're killing them out there. Suddenly he's all normal again and says why are you asking me these questions, I'm not crazy, and he really was back to normal again when I kept talking to him. He was then laying down to sleep and nothing ever happened after that. Kinda creepy when dealing with that at 1 a.m. but I'm used to it. Lots of weird stuff happening in hospitals. My production lead was Catholic and gave some rosaries away to anyone that wanted them one day. We actually worked swing shift and got off work midnight to 4 a.m. depending on overtime availability. The plant was in a pretty rough part of Fresno, California. One of the guys who took a rosary was young and had just started working so hadn't saved up money for a car. He walked home every night a couple miles through that area. After swing shift most people have gone to bed and the streets are pretty empty. It was fall, a little chilly and no moon. He was walking down a run-down block with a field along one side of the street and a couple run-down buildings on the other. A woman walked out from behind one of the buildings and straight up to him. She said, "I'll trade you my ring for your rosary." He was wearing a sweatshirt with a jacket. The rosary was around his neck under the sweatshirt and not at all visible, so he asked, "How do you know I have a rosary?" She didn't answer the question but said again, "I'll trade you my ring for your rosary." At that point he brushed past her and walked away fast. When he stopped to look back and see where she was, she had disappeared. I work late nights and sometimes overnights at a movie theater performing maintenance on the projectors. Because we're open for business from around 8 a.m. to 2 a.m., late nights are the best times for me to work on the machines and run movies to make sure everything is good for the public. Because of these late hours, I'm typically the only theater employee in the building. This building is big. 18 auditoriums, 3 concession stands, 2 stories and 1 arcade, kind of big. So naturally being in the building alone is unsettling, especially when you're working in the darkest area of that huge building. One night, I was wiping down a lens on one of the projectors and out of my peripheral vision, I see one of the ceiling tiles shake and eventually fall with a loud thud. I jumped up and went to investigate, more annoyed at that mess than afraid. But the oddity of it all kept me on edge, so I replaced the tile, finished my business and left. Few nights later, working maintenance again after running the movie Insidious 2. I don't do scary movies, so I stayed up in the semi-lit projection booth area instead of sitting my happy ass in a huge dark empty auditorium by myself. This time I hear rustling coming up from above me in the ceiling tiles. If you've ever played Ocarina of Time, it sounded just like the Skulltula, but it was loud and directly above me. While looking up, jump scare happens on the movie and the loudness of the nearby monitor plus the crazy shit happening above me made me sprint out the door to the booth area and straight to my office. I grabbed a long screwdriver and slowly made my way back to the projection room. Whatever was causing the noise in the ceiling had quieted down. Until I got closer to the original area where I was earlier and the crazy ceiling demon started losing its shit again, and this time going from wall to ceiling and back to wall. I noped the fuck right out of the building and let the movie run on its own. The projector automatically shuts down after the movie ends. The creature existed and terrorized me for a few weeks before I got tired of it all and investigated the building outside where the projection room was located. A bird had made its home inside the building and it was causing all the fuss by flying around in the ceiling. I worked at a dollar store out of the rural area of town, literally the only store within 10 miles, and only cows and a few houses around. I went to the back to put a cart full of cardboard by the dumpsters for pickup, and to take a smoke break. There's bright lights in the parking lot, but behind the store, they're blocked off. I kept hearing crunching footsteps in the field, but assumed they were cows. When I opened the door to go inside, I heard a very quiet faraway voice ask, "Where are you going?" I thought it was my manager and brushed it off. But when I noticed she wasn't in the back room, or by the back room door, I kinda became scared. I grew cold at the fact she was counting cash drawers in the office on the other side of the store, where she was before I left. Now, I grew up in the same area on an old dairy farm. I know it sounds cliche, but I did, and I had seen and heard things growing up. But no matter how many times it has happened to me, I still grow cold. I used to work the night shift at a BPO. Our company just launched a new branch in the 32nd floor of a building that's still being built in some floors. I went outside the building for my 3 a.m. break because I was so sleepy and rode the elevator back to the floor 15 minutes later. I was the only one inside. I tapped the button for my floor and stared straight ahead, still trying to keep awake, as the elevator moved up. When the doors opened, I was still a little out of it and I almost took a step forward, but I stopped myself in time when I realized what I was seeing. Or not seeing, for that matter. It was pitch black. And I was all alone. I checked the buttons, and the one for the 21st floor was lit up. I quickly pressed the close button, scared that it might turn out like a horror movie and the elevator won't close. But it did, and I got to my floor safely. No one was there, and although I was sleepy, I know for a fact I never pressed that button. Still gives me shivers as I type this. Alright, this may not be the spookiest or the scariest, but it scared the living daylights out of me, so I might as well share it. So the place where I work at maintains and services water wells and septic tanks. At the time, I'd only been working about a month or two, so I was pretty green. Anyways, we were having a hell of a long day, and it was about close to midnight when we were on our last job, a chicken house in the middle of nowhere. We had only pulled roughly 15 joints of pipe, if any of you know what that means, not even halfway through. It was hella dark, our only light's the spotlight we had set up. No one was around, the birds were asleep, and it was the three of us, my boss, a real no-nonsense veteran, old-fashioned, Agent Gibbs kind of guy, another one of my coworkers who was about as imaginative as a brick, and me, the gopher. Anyways, we were pulling this pump in the middle of the night, exhausted and dirty from the day, when we hear the most blood-curdling scream we have ever heard. Before the scream stopped echoing, the rest of the pipe, about 450 feet, started shaking, banging up against the casing, beating the hell out of the pump at the end. Now, keep in mind, this stuff is heavy, a grown man standing on the surface couldn't shake it like this. Then it stopped. My boss looked at me, pale as a sheep, and then said we might as well take a break. We haven't spoke about it since. Now I don't know what the hell we disturbed down that hole, but you can bet your biscuits that I'm not going to that site again. I used to work overnight as a security guard for an energy company. My site was near a beach, so I would have to patrol the outer perimeters of the site as well as some of the beach. This was when it was in the middle of Sept, so it was still pretty warm at nighttime in Massachusetts. One night, I looked at my cameras around 2 a.m. and I noticed that one of the cameras had kinda like a floating blob showing near a fence. It looked strange, kinda like a spirit of some sort, but I blew it off as I'm not the type to really believe in that type of stuff. Plus, I thought it was just something in the camera lens. An hour goes by, and it's still there. I do my routine check around the perimeter, and the closer I got to the area where the blob was on the camera, the colder it got. Also, I couldn't see the spirit blob thing with my eyes. Reminder, this is in Sept, it's still warm out. I kinda got freaked out and power walked through the rest of the tour. I got back, looked at the camera, and it was still there. I didn't know why it got all of a sudden cold when I got closer to where that spirit looking thing was. Another hour goes by and it's still there. I do my routine security check again, and still was freezing where the blob was, and I couldn't see it again. I was getting goosebumps from being chilly on a warm night. When I got back inside, I looked back at the cameras and it was just gone. I can't explain it. I took a picture of it with my old phone at the time, but that got destroyed. I wish it didn't though. This thing was creepy and I wanted to know why it got cold whenever I would approach that area. Who knows? I didn't do another routine check that night. I was too freaked to go back out there. We had a lot of security cams we could see from where we sat. One of them, when the lights went off, looked like a person was crouched in the shadows in the corner. And it looked like they moved sometimes. I get it, trick of shadows and camera, but it set a certain mood. Multiple people reported sightings of a young girl crying in the hallway. One coworker died. Couple months later, one of us was in the break room alone and saw someone lean over and peek around the corner at her. She had thought she was alone, didn't recognize him, thought someone had broken in, break room locked, employees had keys. Stepped around the corner to see who it was and he was gone. Went back out and described deceased coworker to a T. She was hired after his death. Watched someone get shoved down. Just standing there, looks up to the left, flies off to the right, looks shoved. Stationary so didn't trip. Watched that on security cams repeatedly from multiple angles. Did not fall. Was pushed. Also saw this humanoid white shadowy outline on cam. Lurking in loading dock hallway. Appeared to peer up staircase, then kind of went strange and floated to ceiling, then reassumed human shape and settled back to floor. Then flew up another staircase. Maybe a bug, but honestly did not look like it. I have a buddy who works overnight at a 24/7 gas station. I started hanging out with him to help him pass time. Normally from around 11 p.m. to around 2 or 3, then I would leave to go get sleep. The owner noticed me hanging out on a security cam, but he said he didn't mind as long as nothing goes missing. But anyway, so I'm hanging out with my friend one night. Would have been after midnight. We had gone around the corner of the main building to smoke a joint. Don't worry, the side of the bundling is far from all the pumps, and has no flammable or explosive materials. We are midway through when we hear a car pull up, so we go back inside and chill at the counter. The car gets their gas and leaves. Right before we walk back out, this guy calmly walks through the door and goes straight over to the refrigerators. My friend says, "Hey, how's your night going?" But the guy doesn't respond at all. He just stands there, staring at the fridge, motionless. I mean seriously, no swaying, no moving his head, no coughs, absolutely no movement. After about 5 minutes, me and him are pretty creeped out, but we don't know what to do, so we pre-dialed 911, but didn't call. Right behind the counter there's a big door that leads to a back room with monitors for the cameras. We ended up going back there to talk for a second to figure out what we should do. We kept our eyes on the screens and still, nothing. We waited until the man had been in the store for about 10 minutes before we went back out. My buddy decided to try and get him to talk. I can't remember what he said, but it was along the lines of, "Sorry man, "You need to buy something or get going." That's when this guy looks over at us, and just begins to scream. No specific words, just one long, loud scream. He then turned and walked outside. He stopped and stood there for another few minutes, and now we were way too scared to do anything other than call the cops. We could see him reaching into his pockets and dropping things on the ground, but we couldn't see what. Then he took off running. We went out and looked at the ground where he was standing, and there was about 15 pocket knives on the ground. Not cheap tourist trap knives, but sharp, expensive knives. None of them looked like they had been used on anyone. The cops came and took all the knives in evidence bags, asked a few questions, then left. After that night, the manager put a key to the place in the back room, so our employees could lock people out if needed. A few weeks later, my friend told me he was out in the front getting some fresh air, when he saw the same guy slowly walking toward the station. He said he ran inside, grabbed the key, and locked the doors before hiding in the back room. He called the cops immediately. He said he was watching the security cameras that sit at the front door. The guy had walked up as close as he could to the glass, and was just motionless again. The police came and he still didn't move, not until he was pressed against the ground and handcuffed. The police searched him and found the body of a small teddy bear with its head removed, 4 more knives, and a small illegally owned pistol tucked into his waistband. The only illegal thug we know about the guy was the gun, but I still don't know what was wrong, what he was doing, or what he was on. Worked for a shitty security company and has just been removed from one site due to a dumbass supervisor. The next day they call me with a new site to work, a graveyard for one night. Big graveyard, think it covered a mile in length, had 3 mausoleums, 2 outdoor and 1 indoor. Huge groundskeeper building and front office along with little sheds here and there for irrigation hubs or something. My job was to drive to certain areas, get out, use a key on a chain in that area on a little timekeeping box thing and move on. Had to hit each key 1 time an hour. Basically had enough time to hit each then start over, the whole shift. Thought the place was pretty neat when I first arrived. Graveyards never made me uncomfortable or afraid. The people in them are already gone, why fear them? Things changed quick. Right off the bat I hated the front office. Something about that building made the hairs on my body stand on end. Couldn't even take a leak in the bathroom without looking over my shoulder repeatedly. Honestly felt like someone hostile was right there every time I turned around. The thing that made me quit my job that night was the indoor mausoleum. Walking through there about mid-shift I hear footsteps running up and down the aisles inside. Hurrying my pace I do a quick check of each aisle but nothing and no one there, so I head down the steps into the basement, turn the key in the box and head towards the exit. I get about halfway through this time and hear the footsteps again, shout out hello. Not expecting any response, but I got one. Sounded like little kids giggling in surround sound. Am honestly surprised I didn't drop dead right then and there, it scared me so bad. Needless to say I ran like a bitch, jumped into my patrol car and GTFO. Did the rest of my rounds that night running through that mausoleum each time. When my relief didn't show, base told me they had someone en route. I waited 2 hours, called them, told them I quit and left. I'm a grown man now, back then I was 23 to 24, and to this day that disembodied sound of child merriment still my top WTF moment. I was working in an office setting, and it was getting pretty late. Midnight more or less. I was alone in the room on the computer up against a wall with my back to the rest of the room. On the opposite side of the room there were a bunch of desks, chairs, tables etc. On the wall above all of that stuff was a clock. So I'm just Microsoft Excelling my life away late that night, when all of a sudden I hear a single, loud crash. I nearly shit my heart out as I turn around and look. And the clock that is normally on the far side of the room, probably about 30 or 40 feet away, on the wall above a bunch of tables and chairs is directly behind me. I mean, it's right there. About 2 feet behind me. How that clock managed to fall all the way from that wall to directly behind me with only making one loud noise I just do not know. I'm not a believer in anything supernatural, but Jesus Christ I still cannot explain how the hell that happened. I worked as a care worker for a few years. I worked for an agency for a while doing graveyard/night shifts in care homes, usually dementia wards. A few creepy things happened most nights. One of the creepiest was a home I worked in one night had a weird layout. The night shift would be sat in the front lounge area which was shaped like a circle/octagon thing, and the bedrooms would be a sort of banana-shaped bend away from it so the hallway crossed in front of the lounge. Weird, but if you can imagine it then the story makes more sense. It's about 11 p.m. and the 4 of us, 1 nurse, 1 shift manager and 2 carers, are sat there chatting, drinking coffee, folding laundry and generally doing the night shift duties waiting for the rounds. You check on the residents every couple hours, and turn them if they can't move, and see if they've wet the bed, etc. etc. and we hear what sounds like a Zimmer frame/walking frame coming up the hallway from the left. We have to check, in case it's a resident out of bed and they have fall danger. So the nurse on duty does the check. Nothing, no one there, no doors open, no signs of anyone being there. We tell each other it was obviously someone got up and went back to bed. 5 minutes later we hear it again, click, click, slowly getting closer. We have to check, remember, this time I get up with the nurse and we both check, and do a full check, down the hallway, which is long and has night lights on, pretty creepy without this. Obviously nothing there. It's quiet for a long while, couple hours go by and then again click, 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 this time no one gets up, we just wait. Click, 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 it get closer and louder and closer and louder, and by this time we're freaking out just a little bit. When it gets to like it's going to come into view of the doors, it stops and we all have this massive shiver, all the hairs on our backs stand up and we go freezing cold, you could see the goosebumps on us all. We literally just sat there, not moving or speaking, just staring at each other, and then it went. The feeling lifted, it went warm again, and we felt like a general easing of pressure we hadn't even noticed. Easily the creepiest thing I've ever felt. I've seen and felt other stuff, but this was the most scary. My time to shine. I guess this is my main account now since I forgot my password for the non-throwaway. I worked as a cocktail waitress in a Las Vegas casino. Graveyard. 1 a.m. to 9 a.m. Lots of crackheads and methies at those hours. It wasn't on the main strip. I come around the corner. The girl is skinny and tiny, her hair is wild, and I can't tell her age, but it's somewhere between 25 to 55. Her skin isn't droopy, but she looks very aged. She doesn't look up at me. She just says Cherry Coke quietly in a monotone voice. I write it down and continue on my way. I don't discriminate. I know she won't tip, but I'll get her the soda and I'll put an extra cherry or two in there too. I come back around to her and set the soda down. She doesn't react. Still pressing buttons. It's right here on your side, hun, watch out for it. I warn so she doesn't move her hand and knock it on the floor. I walk around to her to pick up a piece of trash left on her right hand side. And that's when I see it. She was wearing modest shorts, but they didn't cover her knees. Her right leg, as bony as the rest of her, was missing flesh. I could see off-white bone underneath where her leg healed over the completely missing chunk of her leg. The rest was covered in decaying flesh and sores. I gagged. For the first time in my life something visual made me feel sick. I walked away before anything I did made her feel uncomfortable. I'll never forget it. It was 3:40 a.m. and that night was a full moon. Late to this thread, but I worked at a movie theater and regularly got off at 1 to 2 a.m. depending on when I finished closing chores. Anyway, sometimes after you're done cleaning and stuff you have to go around and check the theaters, make sure nobody is in the ones that aren't showing any more movies, nobody is asleep, etc. The lights are on once a theater is done for the night. Usually I'd go in and look for change or money that people left behind and then move on to the next theater. One night I'm doing the usual, it's about 1:30 a.m. I go into a theater where the last movie for the night ended at 10ish. So it's been a while since anyone was in there, it was also a weekday so it was pretty slow anyways. I walk in and on the middle of the landing there is a backpack, stuffed to the brim with God knows what, you could see someone cram something in there. Admittedly freaked out, I started looking around the theater for somebody in there, I even went to the theaters next to it looking for someone. I couldn't find a goddamn soul anywhere in the whole building. Just to be clear, the backpack was not next to a seat, or even close to one. It was placed perfectly in the middle of the walkway. So eventually I go over the walkie-talkie to my manager and one of maybe 3 people in the entire movie theater. I tell him there's this backpack in theater 10 and it's really creeping me out. He basically says overweight pandas don't be a bitch, carry the backpack to Lost and Found. I mustered up the courage to go grab it after a motivational speech to myself. So I walk up to that thing, sweating and my heart racing. Grabbed it, still alive. You bet your ass I ran as fast as I could and chucked that thing into the Lost and Found box. The next day I came into work and it wasn't there anymore and nobody knew where it went. I still don't know what was in it or if my managers were just fucking with me. I used to be a graveyard shift CNA that worked with rich, elderly Alzheimer's patients. 10 to 6 could be very equal parts boring and stressful, with residents one night falling out of bed and wandering the halls at night and another night practically nothing happening aside from some brief changing. I worked at a very expensive facility, name withheld for privacy matters, which had around 24 residents who lived 8 to a hallway, so getting to a patient when they fell out of bed or just generally needed help could take a quick sprint. One night, while I was sitting with a fellow CNA and watching a re-showing of some reality show about housewives or whatever, I heard a terrifying, ear-bleedingly loud scream that seemed to come from the hallway farthest from me. I immediately jumped up and charged down the hall, opening the door of each individual room and seeing if one of my patients had fallen or was in some sort of distress. Nothing doing for that hallway, so I ran down the next one and did the same. Still nothing. Next hallway and there was still nothing going on. It was then I realized neither the other CNA nor the charge nurse were checking the rooms with me. Instead, they were staring at me as if I ran down 3 hallways and checked 24 rooms in the span of 2 minutes for absolutely no reason. I asked, why aren't y'all checking the residents? Didn't you hear someone scream? Of course, neither of them did. So I sat back down and kept watching schlock TV and tried not to dwell on where the scream came from or who had made it. Not necessarily a graveyard shift, but I was babysitting 2 kids, a boy and a girl who were both around 6 years old. The parents had asked me to watch them until around 12 a.m. since they were going to a football game. Now, these kids were creepy on their own. They'd always want to share a bed together and sleep naked next to each other or bath together. It's a little weird for a brother and sister to want to do that together, but they were young, little kids. What made it creepy was how bad they wanted to sleep naked/bathe together. The brother especially. He'd go crazy when I told him that he had to sleep in his own room in a separate bed. He really liked making physical contact with his sister, including beating her up. But they both loved each other incessantly. These kids were also spoiled, uncooperative, and hyper. It was 11 p.m. and they just would not go to bed. I finally got the sister to at least lay down in her bed, and then I was going to take care of the brother. I finally got him to get into his pajamas and into bed. That's when he started crying uncontrollably. "Jack, what's wrong? Why are you crying?" Pointing at his closet, he said, "Make it go away." "Make what go away?" "The eye. It's staring at me and I don't like it. Make the eye go away." I looked into his closet thinking that maybe there was a toy in there or something making a creepy shadow, but there wasn't. I told him that he could keep his light on if he felt scared. A few minutes later, I hear the sister crying. I go into her room and the first thing she says is, "The eye is staring at me again. Make it go away. It always comes here." These kids had been in separate room and both told me about this eye. I still wonder what it was. I used to work for a very major company I'm not going to say the name of. To put it in perspective though, when they moved into the area with their factory and plant, they took up miles of land for the main massive building, the auxiliary buildings surrounding them, and the roads paved just for their new base of operations. They employed thousands just in this area. Anyway, I needed a job at the time and they hired me for basic security. I meant that as the actual term. There were levels of security guard here and I was just a basic. I was basically the walking security camera that called the more proficient security guards if I saw shit. Well, I worked from 9:30 p.m. to 7:45 a.m. At various points I was sitting in a booth and at other points I was walking around. The weekend before Thanksgiving I remember being on shift and having the night that I quit and found a new job because of. So I'm patrolling around the perimeter of one of the main buildings. There's night shift workers inside and this plant operates 24/7. I hear them working away as usual. My walkie goes off though and someone other than my main shift boss tells me to go check out behind an auxiliary building. Now I only divert usually when my shift boss tells me to. I didn't recognize this voice. So I call back asking for them to ask what's up. My actual shift boss replies this time asking me what I'm talking about and I tell him someone said to check the building. He said no one said that and to stay at my patrol area. I think I'm being bamboozled but I stay and keep patrolling. About an hour later the same message comes back and someone tells me that I need to go check out the field behind the building. I make the same call back and my boss says the same thing. Apparently I'm the only one hearing it. Eventually shifts change. My boss leaves 2 hours before I do and there's a 40-minute gap between shift bosses sometimes if for whatever reason they take a while switching. During that gap the voice comes back on my channel, telling me to go to the auxiliary building again. The building is empty during the night. It's away from the main plant and faces the woods surrounding the land. Just for reference. I ignore it and wait for my main shift manager. I call a few other guards though and ask if anyone has seen anything near the building and tell them what I've been hearing. They all deny hearing anything. One agrees to go look since they're nearby though. Much closer than me. Eventually he says nothing is up near the building, all clear. I finish my shift and start driving away from the plant. I pass by the building on the way out and just out of curiosity glance over to it. There's like 15 people standing next to the tree line of the woods behind the building all wearing red from head to toe. I was contracted and at will, and I told my boss I couldn't continue. I was too spooked. Turns out the same guard who checked for me quit shortly after that. So I work in the middle of the Navajo Nation at a power plant. Naturally, it's kind of creepy driving to work at midnight. So here's a list of things I've seen. It was raining. I was driving down the highway after leaving a gas station. Jamming to some Ashley by Escape the Fate. My Spotify playlist is a very confusing place. I see headlights heading right at me. Me being me, I slam it. Going about 75 when suddenly the headlights veer off into the desert. But they were headlights, they were two orbs, emitting only light off themselves and not where they were headed. They shot into the desert and I drove the rest of the way to work with my jaw dropped. Another night, I was driving to work. I was about a quarter mile from the entrance to the power plant. There was a car being me. We were going uphill, doing about 40. This blue orb comes out of the desert and goes through my car. As I made contact, all my gauges dropped to zero. Battery, gas, RMP, mile per hour, temp and oil. Everything dropped. For what seemed like minutes, then suddenly everything came back up and I drove to work. I told a coworker and he said he saw me coming up the hill but my lights went out. And the last light story, I was driving to work just the other day. When you're coming up the hill to work, you can see the wild stretch of the highway, which is 5 miles from town. As I'm starting the hill climb, I notice a car coming up pretty fast behind me. It got about pretty close. Then the right light went out, then the left. Which would have meant it turned to the right. But if it took a right, it would have gone straight into the desert. Now, the building I work is in also part of the warehouse. A few people have died here. One night I was on me lunch break. 15 minutes is more of a potty break. I was walking down the corridor and just past the women's bathroom. Out of the corner of my eye, I see a black figure standing in the doorway. My heart stops, but I keep walking. I know it's either my imagination. I walk into the men's room, drop trough and start pooping. About 30 seconds into my poop, the door opens. It's 4 a.m., the warehouse is closed until 7 a.m., I am the only person back there. I hear footsteps walking and an overwhelming smell of a spicy men's cologne with cigarettes. The footsteps got closer and stopped at the shower. Suddenly the lights go out. I pinched my turd, pulled everything up, didn't even tuck in my shirt, no time. I booked it out of there and finished my poop in the bathroom where I work. I didn't go back there for a few months.